In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects. This podcast is not just about dissecting topics from two different perspectives. It's also about how to have conversations on difficult topics while avoiding the urge to tear someone's head off and vomit down the bloody stump of their neck.
All right, so today we're talking about the two-party system. And I think we're both going to be in agreement on this one that doesn't work, at least as it's being manifested here in the US. Would you agree?
Yes, Brian, I think the two-party system is not functioning well in our country.
Okay. So if I were to put forth kind of the basic consensus of my belief or issue or like on the topic, I guess, keeping it sort of broad, I would say that the parties have too much power, and much of that power manifests itself in terms of money and the way that they're able to control much of the system, and then of course in the government itself, and that we would all benefit if there was a little more competition, maybe free market in politics, if you will.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, that's funny.
I didn't think about that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. And sometimes we use the word competition, and I feel people have there's a negative connotation with it. If you think about, at times I've talked about other subjects, teaching or schools, and we talk about competition. Well, they shouldn't be. Why should these teachers have to be thinking about competing with each other? But all we're saying is choice, right? So in this case, we're saying if we had more options other than you either choose the Democrats or the Republicans, I think that would be a healthy change for us, because right now there's only you're in some ways stuck, because if you really dislike the platforms or the ideals or ideas of one side and you're on the other and you want to leave them or you want some sort of a change, if you only have one choice, one alternative, it's not a very robust system that you're working with.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's, and I said it before, but one of the things I enjoy about us having these weekly conversations is it forces me to get a little bit more information about something I've sort of taken for granted in terms of how I thought I understood the system. And in looking up or getting some little information on the two-party system, one of the things I ran across was that one of the theories is that in a two-party system, both parties will gravitate towards the middle, towards a moderate view. And I don't see that. In most cases, I don't really see that happening. I think you have that occasionally when people will try and reach across to the other party. But it seems like in some of the past, in some of the big elections, it seems like once the primary challenger, the challenge or the leader of the party that's going to go forth and campaign for the position, it seems like there are many times, instead of trying to draw people from the other side, we have such a polarization within our political system that they're actually trying to draw the extremes within their own party. And the one that comes to mind for me is when Mitt Romney was running for president. I was intrigued and I was a little bit optimistic because I knew a little bit about his record as the governor of Massachusetts. But then once he won the Republican primary, it felt like he was not reaching out to the Democrats. He was reaching out to the far right to make sure that he had a solid base. And so that turned me off of him.
Yeah, I it's interesting, and you talk about primaries. I mean, there's a few things to say about that. They play a difficult game, and it's one of the reasons that I think it's really difficult to get the right type of person in politics. And I like Mitt Romney. I respect him a lot. I think there's plenty of good people on both sides of the political aisle, but they have to play a very difficult game where they're trying to appeal to a broad base of people. So at times they probably either espouse ideas that, or they probably champion ideas that, are a bit extreme because they're trying to appeal to one wing of the party, but then other times they're trying to appear more conservative or middle of the road. I guess not conservative, more middle of the road, more moderate, because they're trying to appeal to another group of people that maybe disenfranchised Democrats or the more moderate Republicans, but they have to appeal to all of them. But the primary process is an interesting one because there's I'll mention this podcast, the Freakonomics podcast. They have an episode on duopoly, and they talk about the duopoly of the two parties, which was, and the reason I mention it is because I'm taking a lot of the ideas I have on this subject from them, and I thought it was a great podcast. But that one of the ways they thought we could reduce the influence of the two-party system would be to take away the primary. Because in the primary, I mean, who votes in a primary? It's the most strident or virulent Democrats and Republicans. And so many times you don't get the moderate a candidate as you otherwise would, because you have to appeal to those people. In fact, that's, I think, why oftentimes they talk about in the primaries, they need to be sure to find a moderate candidate that's going to appeal to the whole broad base of the population that's going to be voting. But when you start out the elective process in that way, by starting out with a primary, and the people that are most likely to vote in the primary are the most, I don't want to say right wing, but they have the strongest feelings about the Republican Party. Most people that are kind of moderate, they don't get involved. If they get involved in voting at all, it's not in the primary, it's in the general election.
Right.
So who's voting in that one? It's the people that might tend to be more farther right wing or far left, or at least have the strongest feelings about it. So they're going to have, maybe they'll be more invested in finding somebody who's not quite as moderate. So that's one technique we could use to reduce the influence of the two-party system, is by removing the primary.
I think I think there's some truth to that. From what I also learned was that every state is different in terms of how they handle their elections, and there are some states that don't have primaries. One of them being Louisiana. And so they'll have anybody can go and put their hat in the ring, if you will, and be part of the election. And if I recall correctly, you could have 20 or 30 people that are campaigning, and I believe you need the winner to get a certain number of votes. I think it's the 50% threshold plus one vote, so that they have the majority. If you don't have one candidate that has that amount, then they'll have a runoff with I guess a certain number of winners would then be part of that runoff. And so when I became aware of this, I guess it was in the last election, it sounded incredibly chaotic, but now I'm sort of warming to it a little bit. And part of the reason why I am is because I feel like the parties have too much power in terms of the money that they wield. That with our attempts to try and take some of the pressure off of the candidates, there's been limitations put on how much people can donate to individual candidates, but if I understand it correctly, there's no limitation to how much one can contribute to the party. And so now the parties have this huge amount of a war chest, if you will, that they can go and dole out to their particular candidates that they want. So as an independent, campaign or competing against one of the major parties, they're at a significant disadvantage because they don't have that same war chest available to them. And money is very important in American politics because you're buying airtime, you're buying exposure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I don't know exactly what the process is in Louisiana, but ranked choice voting, I like that process where you can say, I think oftentimes people are afraid to vote for a third party candidate, a Green Party or a Libertarian candidate, because they think, well, if I maybe just be taking votes away from somebody that actually has a chance of winning. So, if you had ranked, for example, in our state, in Utah, many people wanted to vote for a guy named Evan McMullin because they didn't in 2016 because they didn't like Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. But even now people talk about it as if they were throwing their vote away.
Yeah.
Because, if you hated Hillary more than you hated Donald Trump or vice versa, and you voted for Evan McMullin, that may have taken a vote away from your least worst candidate that actually had a chance of winning. But the ranked choice voting, yeah, my understanding of how they do it, I don't know about Louisiana, is they run it off, they count it all, they tally up all the votes, they take everybody's first place votes, and if nobody has won in that first tally, then they go through and they don't have a majority like you talked about, then they remove all of the last place, the person that got the least number of first place votes, and they run them again. And some of those people that their first place votes were removed now, then their second place vote becomes their first place vote, and eventually you have a winner. But that gives people an opportunity to vote for a third party candidate or a fifth party candidate and take some of that power away from those two parties.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I do like the ranked choice voting, and I believe it's Maine, I think, has instituted third ranked choice voting.
I think I did hear that, yeah.
I think Alaska is looking into it. I did see that there were some other smaller areas that used to incorporate ranked choice voting. I think New York City at one point, if I recall correctly, had something like that, but that was more at the municipal level rather than the national level. And I think it would be a really interesting approach to have, if you have 20 candidates, to be able to list 1 through 20, your order of priority. Just one thing that they were, and some of the people I was reading about that were the experts in the field were saying that so many people these days vote for the lesser of two evils, meaning most people don't like either candidate they're presented with on the Republican or Democratic side, and they just say they just decide which one do they hate less. And vote for that one, which is a really weird way to choose our leader. It's an unfortunate method of approach.
Well, you wonder how much of it has to do with, we talked about a minute ago, what you have to do to get there, what a delicate line you have to walk, where you don't want to say something that's going to alienate any part of the party. Your first problem is you're trying to appeal to a lot of different viewpoints. So you can't just try to appeal to the moderate branch of the Republican Party or Democratic Party or the far left or the far right. You try to appeal to as many people as possible, which can seem disingenuous when they're talking about, when you're trying to appeal to so many different people, and at one speech or one rally or at one point you're speaking to one group of the party and another point you're speaking to another, so people might see that as disingenuous. The other thing they have to do is appeal to special interests. When you're trying to get such a broad base of people to support you, just as an example, I'm trying to think of an issue where I'm not saying that one, I know that both parties do this just as much as the other. So if this one comes off as, well, the Democrats are doing it or the Republicans, I'm not doing that, because both of them are just as guilty of this. But for example, maybe we take farm subsidies just as an example. And if you support farm subsidies, or you give an indication to a group of farming voters, or a union, and you say, I'm going to support you, you get that whole union. So it's very appealing, even if you disagreed with exactly what that union is asking for. If it's close, or you think, well, I could get that whole union, there'd be this huge temptation to give them what they want, or to promise to do for them what they want, so that you can get all of their votes. And then say to yourself, well, I'm giving in a little bit in this issue, but overall, I'm going to do so much good for the country if I'm elected. I just can't let my opposition win because they'd be so terrible for the country. It's the type of person that this appeals to, that whole process appeals to, might not be the best person to run our country, if that makes any sense. If you're an honest person that always says exactly what they're thinking, doesn't try to appeal to a broad group of people, doesn't say one thing to one person and another thing to another person, you're probably not going to win. And so we don't get those type of people in government, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, totally. There is a certain skill, a communication skill that has become very important that we require in our leaders. And I remember one example when Obama was president and Biden was his vice president. And this they had inherited the economy from Bush, and there was the whole housing crisis that was happening, and everything was in free fall. And Obama had, one of his campaign promises was that they were going to fix the economy and shore things up. And of course, it took a year or two or three, whatever it was, for things to turn around. And at one point, it was early on in the presidency, and the new numbers came out about the national economy, and they weren't good. And Biden said, well, we couldn't have seen this coming. It's not our fault. And Obama had to come in and basically correct, if you will, what Biden had said. And he said the same thing, but he said it a whole lot more diplomatically.
Right.
Where if you weren't really paying attention to it, you're like, oh, God, I can totally see Obama's point of view. But that was one of Obama's skills, was his ability to communicate and massage things to work in his favor or to appeal to the broadest audience. So I totally agree with you about the communication, and also the ability to be a little more topic fluid, I guess, issue fluidity, where you might have a strong opinion about something, but when you're talking to a particular group, maybe not show such a, what your strong opinion is, but more of an alignment with that group that you're talking to. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is an interesting challenge. And if we had more of a coalition government, then maybe it wouldn't be such a big deal. If we had, let's say the Republicans and the Democrats, and then the Greens and the Libertarians, and all these other groups that had to govern by coalition, perhaps you could have people with a very strong opinion, and you wouldn't worry about it so much because you knew there was going to be three other groups or some other groups that were going to temper that particular individual's enthusiasm over certain topics, which seems to be how a lot of other countries that have multi-party systems seem to operate.
Yeah, I don't know as much about the coalition government. Yeah, something like that would work. The ranked choice voting, the doing away with primaries is an option that I think could help us. Another one, it's funny how that we've allowed this gerrymandering system to continue for so long. I mean, both parties are just as guilty, but
for sure.
Yeah, if they just outsourced that and said, hey, we're going to have, I don't know, a couple of accounting or consulting firms come up with a process of how, how often we redistrict and how it's done. It's a computer program that is an algorithm that everybody can agree, that at least 2 or 3 consulting firms can agree to, or something like that, and just take it out of the hands of the politicians, because man, they do a poor job of managing that system.
Yeah, we're going through that right now here in Pennsylvania, where there's a whole, they're trying to put together some redistricting, and no one gets excited about it. Everyone gets upset. That the Republicans have the power within the state government, and so they have a particular system that they like. I believe it went to court once, and the judge told them to work on it, and we also have a Democratic governor, and so he's saying that the present system he's going to veto once it comes into play. I mean, it is just it's horrible. Yeah, it seems like that there should be some basic standards, basic systems, that maybe you work on it's city boundaries, and then county boundaries, and then you incorporate geographical boundaries, so that you have an order of operations by which you start to divvy things up, rather than looking at the particular population and saying, how can I manipulate the border to most benefit me and my people. But this also, the gerrymandering, it also illustrates one of the problems with changing our system. That going to, let's say, for example, like a ranked choice voting, is that it would dilute the power of the two parties. And so in my research, some of these experts were saying that it doesn't typically happen from the top down, the change to a ranked choice or coalition type system, because those at the top, the government officials, the elected officials, recognize that this new system is going to take away some of their power, and they don't want that. Right. And so usually it happens from the bottom up. where you have kind of a not want to call it an uprising, but a populist movement of implementing some of these changes.
Drain the swamp, if you will.
Everyone keeps claiming that's what's going to happen, but hasn't seen it happen yet. Oh. Yeah, lovely idea, just doesn't seem to work.
Yeah. Well, and I'll bring up a controversial topic. One thing.
Bring it.
One thing that I think would, it's an interesting thing. We talked about some of the reasons that politics appeals to the wrong people. And I don't want to, be critical of any of of anybody in particular. I guess we probably could pretty easily, but I'm sure there's great politicians out there. But I think in general, it probably attracts maybe the wrong people, which power usually does. And I'm sure there are great people trying their best to do what they can for our country on both sides of the aisle. There's some great Democrats and great Republicans, I'm sure. But it probably in some ways attracts the wrong people. Another issue, big issue that I see with the whole process is the fact that when you center so much power in one place, we can talk about all these different ways that we try to control that power. But it's going to be difficult I agree, probably from the ground up, we need to influence a change like ranked choice voting or doing away with the primaries or something. I think that's right. But just in general, when we talk about what government does, the more power that's centered in government, the more influence we give it over our lives, the more incentive there's going to be for people outside of government, but in positions of power, to control that power center, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
So the people that have the most influence on government are not going to be people, like you and I, that, we might even have a podcast that influences 7 or 8 people. Or, we might even, get even Joe Rogan, he's not going to have, I'm just trying to think of these people online, Jordan Peterson or Sam Harris, people that have a great influence online. Even people like them, they don't have the same type of influence that a corporation or a very wealthy person that can send lobbyists, that can find ways to influence government. They're going to be hugely incentivized to go and influence government when there's a huge power center there. So the more influence we give government over our lives, the more incentive there is for people to go and take control there. And it's going to be hard to keep them out. And we can try to come up with all these different rules and legislation and everything else to keep them out, but it's going to be next to impossible to do it because they have such an incentive to get there and control that power and influence. Am I making any sense with that viewpoint?
Yes, you sure are, Colin. And I noticed that we've come back to one of your favorite themes, which is that government corrupts and attracts corrupt individuals, and that we need to take away the power from the government because it's inevitable that corruption will occur.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see how you I like those ideas of the ranked choice voting and doing away with gerrymandering. Those are all great. Those are all great ideas. But it leaves there that incentive that we don't even know what the future will bring. Let's say we put all sorts of rules and regulations in place, some way that power and influence from outside of government is going to come in and try to wrest control from us. And they have so much more incentive and power and money and reason to do it than we do. For us, it's not that big of a deal, government, right? Because our taxes aren't that great. If we got some savings on our taxes, it might be a couple $1,000s. For some of these corporations, it's millions and billions of dollars that are at stake. So they have all the reason there to go and seek influence in government.
Yeah, I mean, I get your point, and I'm not totally in opposition to the idea. I just feel like it's not so. My opinion is that it's not that the power is the issue. I feel like the money is the issue. That people are drawn to power because with power they can get more money, and so that they're one of the ways. I would say the easiest way to manage the corruption would be to be able to keep an eye on the money. And and to be able to track where the money is going. And you know, I've said it before in some of our other conversations, transparency being one of the key steps to that. That if we can, and I think that we can even make things more transparent, not just in terms of how the government is functioning or how some of the decisions are being made, but also more transparent in terms of the money that people have access to, or the money that is passing through their systems or whatever it might be. What, you know, I think that would be an approach to managing the corruption, because I do feel like government is, let's call it a necessary evil. And of course, you and I disagree on how much, you know, government we actually need, but some amount of government is necessary. Sure. And we can't do away with it. It'd be better if it were smaller. But the government has to be able to make decisions on big subjects. You know, they're trying to create the safety net. They're trying to create a direction for what we're at, 300 million people in this country now, 350, something like that.
Yeah, 330 or 340, I think.
Okay, so I mean, that you can't have 50 different states creating 50 different sets of rules, and that if you move from one state to the next, you need to know what those different rules are. I mean, an easy and obvious example is, you know, right turn on red on the roads, where in New York City, you can't turn right on red. Now, I don't know what happens if you get pulled over for that and you have an out-of-state license. I don't know if they give you a pass. But to have 50 different states with 50 different rules creates a complex system that is just unmanageable. So there has to be a central authority, not just about roads, but about other things as well.
I guess it's like you're saying that we can't have 50 states with different rules, but then you're illustrating where we do, and we seem to be doing okay. I agree to on some level, I guess, that there needs to be a federal government. The question, as always, is just how much there is. I would just say, or how much federal government interference in our lives we actually want, and how much ability we want within the states, within the local municipalities, to be able to control those rules and regulations. My only point is, the more power and the more influence you give to the federal government and the state governments, the more incentive there's going to be for people with the reason to do it to go and seek after that power and influence. And as much as we try to make it transparent, they find ways around it. You know, we've seen that with some of the campaign finance laws. We thought, oh well, we'll put these laws in place, and then everything's going to be great. And then what happens? They find some loophole or some way in that we didn't realize, and it's almost like when we keep putting all these rules and regulations in place, we give them more and more incentive to make it more and more secretive how they're doing it, so that they can still get their influence, and we're just not going to know about it, you know.
And I would agree with you. You know, I think a great example of what you just said, it was the McCain-Feingold, I think it was called, the act where they were trying to take some of the money away from the politicians when they're during the campaigns, and because of it, they created the PACs, the political action committees, which didn't exist before the McCain-Feingold Act. And so now you have these massive, privately run, secretive organizations that have huge amounts of money that are not supposed to, according to the rules, communicate directly with the politicians. Now, of course, I'm pretty sure they do, right. But these are the rules that are in place, and so you have an even more complicated and the greater potential for corruption in an attempt to try and fix a political system. So I can't disagree with you on that one. That there are always potential problems, but I would also say that to return to the idea of the two-party system, that there are other countries that seem to be able to solve these problems that we just can't seem to address, and I feel like Americans are too reluctant to go and look outside of themselves for solutions. And so if we were to go and look at some of these other multi-party systems in other countries and see how are they able to make it work. Now, you have some countries in which it seems like they're holding an election every 6 months because the coalition that was running the government is falling apart, which is, for example, Israel in the last couple of years keeps on having elections because they can't hold a coalition together.
Right.
But there's other countries that seem to manage it quite well. I mean, if you want to look at a stable one, look at Germany. They have a bunch of different parties. They have the Green Party has a fair amount of power in Germany, and somehow they seem to make it work. So let's go and look at some other countries. How do they do it? And then maybe we can learn from some other people. America doesn't always have the best idea. Let's look to some other people that get some good ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. There's probably some good ideas out there for sure. I mean, that's true. And it's difficult sometimes when we argue about those different countries. We point out the thing that we like best that they do, and not some of the other adverse consequences. I don't know as much about Germany. Maybe it's going great. I know they're they have a different culture from us.
Yeah.
So implementing some of the same rules may not work quite as well, just like a mask mandate, might work better in South Korea than it does, or a vaccine mandate, or some of these other things probably would work better in South Korea and or Germany and not as well here. So we should take into account our culture and how that would affect things. Some of the other unintended consequences that might result in our culture or that we're not really even looking at that happen there. But yeah, I think that's where some of the ideas of the ranked choice voting came from, is from other countries. I think Ireland was one that has used ranked choice voting and has gone pretty well for them.
Yeah. Actually, I think Ireland was the first one that I became aware of, and it was a pretty intriguing idea when I heard about it and read the article about what the process is. I think definitely it'd be worth looking at some other places to see what we can do. I think this is one of those topics where you and I pretty much align almost entirely on. We tend to have some disagreements about how the implementation might go about, and what the final product might look like. Big government versus little government, all that stuff. But and I think this is useful to recognize that even though you and I are politically, ideologically, I don't want to say completely oppositional, but fairly much so, there are going to be some topics that will span across the divide. We can build bridges with these.
Yeah, it is weird to be in such agreement with you.
Almost feels like something's wrong.
Yeah, maybe we should stop. We should start talking some more. We should keep this conversation going because this is weird to end. But and I would say this, if we could do something like this, I think I should be the most motivated for it, because although it probably seems at times like I'm more conservative and Republican than anything else, I really dislike both parties, and I think they don't have our best interest at heart. And I think, and I feel very, to your point earlier, it's like we're taking the lesser of two evils. Even Mitt Romney, who I liked in a lot of different ways, I wish there were more options in all of these elections, because I don't tend to agree with either party. I think the way that we have it set up, they don't have our best interest at heart. And when there's only two options and so many different issues that each party has got to have a platform on, it's just impossible to think that you're going to get a candidate that agrees with everything that you want. So you need more choice, more options. We could call it competition, but we just need more options. Yeah.
All right, we agree. Perfect.
All right.
Hey, so if we look to our next conversation, since the phone call that you and I had a couple days ago, we came back to the media topic again. Do you want to maybe riff off of that, and maybe if we were to look at, for example, some of the other media options, such as podcasts, some of the media influencers, the people that are writing their own articles, like on Substack or whatever. You want to? Does that sound like something you want to discuss?
Yep. That sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, so let's do a little bit of digging, and then maybe we can refine that a little bit and figure out how how we'll frame the conversation next time.
Sounds good.
All right, cool. Good to talk to you, Colin.
All right, Brian. We'll see ya.
Take care.
We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.